They've helped hundreds of companies across the U.S. to 1,100% increase in revenue.
Tommy Mello's A1 Garage, he grew from 40 million to 250 million.
You talk about how much money is actually spent making up for bad branding.
Worst things you could ever do to your business is name it after initials.
You're naturally increasing average dollar per sale by the influence of the brand.
You have a lot of different costs associated with weak branding.
Are there other cardinal sins when it comes to branding?
Overspending on marketing is the tax you pay for being unremarkable.
If a startups have less than 100,000 in revenue, how big should they go when it comes to branding?
It's always the least amount of money to invest in branding today.
Welcome to Beers with Contractors.
All right, tradies, another week of Beers with Contractors. Terry, how you doing, sir?
Doing great. Well, yourself?
Oh, man, great. I mean, we had a chance to, go to another wine festival with our wives this last weekend and become domesticated. So
There to support our spouse.
yeah, well, we came out unscathed, and I think we brought a little culture to, middle of nowhere, Oklahoma.
No,
So
that is always enjoyable. I mean, to be honest, it should have been more craft than wine. They sold it as more wine than craft, but
Yeah.
it was enjoyable.
hey, well, go out there supporting the local economy, getting the wives a little wine tipsy, and then off back to home to the chores and life and everything that comes with it. So, well, hey, let's get started today. I'm excited about today's guest, Terry. I know you've been listening to me talk about this guy for a while, but before we get to it, of course, all of you guys know, if you get a chance to help our sponsors and even supporting a few of our causes, if you'll like, subscribe, and hit the notification button. I do want to give some shout outs. We had over 50 new subscribers and followers, so I'm just going to go through like the first 10 or no, 7 or 8 here, because some of them have inappropriate names, so I didn't want to bring those up on the air. But, we had Christine Salvi, Greg Lucas, Mike Hillman, Michael Culver, Bernie6171, Master of Barricades, Reinvigorated Properties, and Alec Cowboy 71. Thanks for subscribing. I appreciate you guys. Maybe I'll try to get a full list that Drake can throw into the credits or allow them to scroll through at certain times. So appreciate you guys. Also, a quick reminder, our store is live, so if you want to pick up some of your Contractors kick-ass gear, just a reminder that supports mine and Terry's construction camp for kids, so a portion of that goes there. And then also, Terry, we've got some new sponsors coming up in January. So Foundation Rescue Supply reached out to me. I'm excited to have those guys involved. They got some great products. So
Very nice.
So, Terry, are you ready to get started?
Let's do it.
You're going to be educated today, Terry. We're going to bring you out of the Stone Age from the marketing perspective. So I've been waiting for this guy for a little while, but that's because I'm a slow reader. I wanted to keep my promises and read the books first. And I did, both of them. And our guest today started in high school actually doing custom lettering and is now leveraging over 30 years of experience in the branding and marketing space. He is the owner of KickCharge Media, a home service branding company that specializes for just contractors, creative team. They help bring clarity to what they like to say, bringing to your brand, making sure it's branded, not blanded. And they've helped hundreds of companies across the U.S., not only branding, but improving revenue as high in certain case studies to 1,100% increase in revenue. He's also the author of Building a Big Small Business Brand, as well as his newest book, Branded Not Blanded. Got them both right here. Awesome book. Took tons of notes we're going to be citing today. So please welcome Dan Antonelli. Dan, great to have you, buddy.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yeah. Now, what part of the country you're in? You're in New Jersey, right?
I'm in New Jersey, yeah, home of the drones.
Well, I know Jersey gets a bad rap, but I actually like New Jersey. It is a pretty state in certain times of the year. Hell of a lot prettier in Oklahoma during certain times of the year. But yeah, glad to have you, Dan. And also, like I mentioned before, that you got into this because of you actually started in high school doing lettering and stuff. But like, what nudged you into that and made the light bulb go off and say, hey, this is what I'm going to do for a living?
Yeah, it's kind of a strange journey, I guess. But my brother was always into hot rods and used to get these hot rod magazines. And I would look at them and, I was kind of into cars, but I was really into the airbrushing and the lettering that would go on some of these drag cars and some of these muscle cars. And so I became, really fascinated with lettering and actually pinstriping. So believe it or not, I actually started out first as a pinstriper. So I would pinstripe cars, motorcycles, things like that. And then inevitably people would ask you to do lettering. And then with lettering came, signs and then truck lettering. So you would do work for someone and then they'd have like, maybe they had a contracting business and they'd ask me to do the lettering. And so I was lettering vans in my parents' backyard in Staten Island, New York, where I actually grew up. And just was always fascinated with lettering. And then I still really loved the idea of like after I finished creating this lettering job for this contractor, then being out on the road and then seeing it and they're like, hey, I did that. I did that. Even contractors get into that when they say, hey, I did that roof or I did that siding. And, as they're driving through neighborhoods and, and there's a sense of pride. And, it's kind of crazy because it's almost 40 years later and I still get excited when I see, one of my vans driving around or if I'm out somewhere in the country and I happen to see some of my work out in different parts of the country. And it's pretty wild too, just thinking about the impact of our work at this point. I mean, we have actually so many new clients in Australia that we're doing work for. We've got work in the UK and all these different countries. And it just blows my mind that this, kid from Staten Island that was, lettering trucks in his parents' backyard at age 15 is still doing this stuff. And, we've got a staff of almost 40 people here now. And, we really truly believe that our work can change lives. And I think that that's the one core thing that has really driven us all these years is the notion that our work can change people's lives. And it's a responsibility that we really take to heart. And knowing how much our work impacts our clients' lives is ultimately our why, So it's pretty cool that I get to live that why every day and, get to share the success with the team for different clients when they message me and just, talk about how much the work has impacted them. And it's a pretty wild thing to be able to be a part of.
Yeah. So I know that's kind of a unique question. And by the way, sorry, I totally missed the international reach on your biography. So sorry about that, Dan.
It's okay.
By the way, does the water rotate differently in the toilet in Australia? Have you confirmed that with the clients? Yeah. Well, they drink a lot down there. So, I mean, that makes sense. But why home services? I mean, what just made you say, hey, this is what I'm specializing in?
I think when we first started, we were doing many different trades. We did a lot in the landscape trade and actually did a ton of landscapers. I mean, I feel like New Jersey has more landscapers per capita than any other state in the country. So in the beginning, I was doing a lot of lettering for trailers, landscape trailers, and then they would have mason dumps pulling those trailers. So I would do a lot of that work. But, what I think over the years, you really started seeing more in the home service space, specifically in the HVAC, the plumbing, the electric, a much more deeper appreciation for the role that branding plays in their marketing. And they really started understanding how important the vehicle was as part of their marketing efforts. More so than other trades. So I think we really focused a lot more heavily within the last decade on home services, I would say. At this point, we probably have north of 3,000 home service brands under our belt, I would say. But certainly, a high degree of specialization within home service and specifically HVAC, plumbing and electric. And now you start seeing other trades become more and more cognizant of the role that branding plays. For example, like garage door contractors. We've probably done about 30 or 40 garage door brands within the last 3 or 4 years. And you started hearing people like Tommy Mello talking a lot more about why that was important. And so that sort of provided a lift for that industry to say, hey, you know what, we should really be investing in branding. So we're seeing a lot more in that space. And even more recently, we're seeing roofing being another vertical that people are paying a lot more attention to. So kind of roofing reminds me of sort of the garage door space 5 years ago. And now they're sort of really embracing the notion of, hey, you know what, it's really important for us to be investing in our branding and doing things that are much more disruptive than the typical, clip art rooftop logo idea. So,
oh, gosh. And as soon as I started reading your book, that's all I started seeing was rooftop logos for everything. And it's like, oh man, my reticular activating system kicked in. Yeah.
Dan, in your book, you talk a lot about how much money is actually spent making up for bad branding. Can you kind of elaborate by what that means?
Well, I think it's interesting because people talk about, when they think that investing in branding is really expensive and they say, oh my God, it's so expensive to invest in branding. And I'm not talking about going on Fiverr and getting some logo that isn't actually really going to even perform for you. But when you think about the cost of what poor branding does to your business, and you hear a lot of contractors, they're continuing to complain about the cost to market their business, what they are indebted to Google for delivering their leads and what their LSA spend and their PPC spend. And, a lot of times I look at those companies and I look at their branding and I know why they're a slave to Google, because there's nothing unique or compelling about the brand that would live in someone's mind rent free to be recalled at a later date when someone needs service. And so they're sort of a slave to the notion of, generic keywords like, air conditioning repair near me, and hoping that their name shows up at the top, or paying to get their name to show up at top, instead of actually building a brand that people would remember, building a brand that lives in people's minds. So you have the cost of marketing being increased the weaker your branding is. And, that quote I have in the book is, to the effect of, the more unremarkable your brand is, the more money you will spend to market that brand, right? So Roy Williams has that quote that overspending on marketing is the tax you pay for being unremarkable, right? So a lot of times you could look at that and you could say, okay, well, that's part of the cost of having a weak brand. But then you have the other cost as far as what does it do for your average tickets? What does it do for your booking rates? What does it do for your close rates? What does it do for your new customer acquisition costs? So you have that expense as well, right? And then you have the expense for culture and you have the expense for recruitment. So, again, the common complaint is I can't find people to work for me, or no one wants to work for me.
Yep.
And then you look at the branding, you look at the truck that, you're going to drive if you're a potential employee, and you look at what it looks like when you walk into that office. And I understand why no one probably wants to work for you, because it doesn't look like a place I want to be associated with. And I'm going to be proud to put on a uniform and proud to be associated with. So you have a lot of different costs that are associated with weak branding. And I think, the interesting thing is most people don't understand or truly understand those costs until they've actually lived with a better brand. So a lot of people don't understand or don't feel there's a value in having a great brand. And to a certain extent, maybe that's understood because they've never actually experienced what it's like to have a great brand and what that will do to morale, culture, average tickets, booking rates, like all these other things that are associated with it.
Well, Dan, you talk about living in someone's mind rent free, right? And what comes to mind for me is like Jolly Goat, right? And so I know they're an organization that's worked with you. And as soon as I saw their brand for the first time, I can't get it out of my head. I mean,
Right.
Can you kind of take us through what it was like before and after? Because to me, they just came on the scene and they're everywhere now.
Yeah. And so the interesting thing about Jolly Go, which is a garage door company, is they asked us to rename them. And now I'm struggling to try to remember what their old name was.
Yeah, that's so funny because it's like, Terry, you said you finally noticed them.
And
They had been around for 9 years.
I feel
and
like
they
it was
were
like
called-
Garage Door Solutions, maybe.
Yep.
No,
That's what it was.
Is that what it
Garage
was?
No.
Okay.
Solution.
never seen them, never heard of them.
So Garage Door Solutions sounds, of course, more like a search term than it does an actual brand name. But Jolly Go was a name that we thought, hey, this would be really cool to develop a brand around this notion of this Jolly Goat. And, making sure that not only is it a sticky name, but that they're going to be able to embrace what they can do with this brand. And so they've done not only a great job, certainly becoming visible in the community with just the trucks and how disruptive the trucks look, how easy it is to read their name, and, an awesome mascot that we designed. But they've invested in going to home shows. They've invested in going to different parades in the community. And so they bring actual goats to these events. And if you're a parent walking by, you've got your kids with you, and then you see Jolly Goat, and then you see they've got some actual goats. Well, yeah, I'm going to probably stop by your booth and I'm going to probably want to take a picture. Or maybe my kid's going to pet the goat. And so they've done what we want to see with every company that invests in branding is take the steps to become visible in your community, to become that notion of 5 Mile famous, so that people within your community, when they think about garage doors, that's who they're thinking about now. So everyone that's kind of been in their circles and been at an event that they've been at, or a parade where they've kind of showcased the brand going down the street, it's a very sticky name. And so I don't think those people are going to be going on Google saying garage door repair near me. They're going to say, oh, what was the name of that company that had that goat? Oh, yeah, Jolly Goat. Yeah. Let me just go on Google and type in Jolly Goat instead of garage door repair near me. And so on a branded keyword search for their actual brand name, they're easily going to show up very high for that at a very minimal cost. That's kind of a great example of the notion of, a disruptive brand, but a brand that's also working super hard to become sticky in someone's mind so that they can recall them later on when they need service.
Yeah. Well, and I love that because you talk about that heavily in kind of your first case study, Dan, in the book. And by the way, for any of you guys that know me, know that I'm not a good reader. The book is amazing. I read it on a plane ride to Charlotte, North Carolina a few months ago. And man, I completed that thing in a 2.5 hour plane ride. It was awesome. And it made me even realize, like, how much money am I spending because I'm not getting my message clearly across about what I do. And I'm going to cite some stuff here in a little bit, Dan, specifically. But you mention a lot in the book, and I'd love to hear a case study of, like, the big company that's been around forever that says, hey, I'm too big to rebrand, because it's going to be more of an expense, not an investment. But we've been around so long. I mean, you've had a few of those, right?
Yeah.
Where you've taken big companies and rebranded. And tell us a little bit about a case study there.
This episode is sponsored by Performance, the bonus system designed to increase profits for your construction company. Performance incentivizes your production team for more efficient installs and rewards them when they beat your preset labor goals. So no more milking the clock and no more unnecessary gas station trips. Performance drives your team to work harder and smarter. Every construction company on Performance has seen a 7% decrease in direct labor costs or more. Click the link in the description or visit performance.co to schedule your demo today. That's PER, MANCE.co. Reward your team, retain your team, grow your profits. Performance.
Well, I think that you have two schools of thought when you get to a certain size, right? So you have the school of thought that everything I've done to get me to this size is the very reason why I should never make a change, because that's reinforcing in my mind everything that's working, and why would you ever make a change, right? And then you have the notion of everything that I have right now and the success that I've attained with this current brand, does it actually represent who I've become as a company today, or does it represent what I started at 5 years, 10 years, 15 years ago? And does it actually personify the level and the care and the craftsmanship that we're known as today, right? So I think you kind of have those two competing thoughts for a lot of different companies. But a couple examples. I mean, one of the bigger ones that we've rebranded was Tommy Mello's A1 Garage. And that was a rebrand when he was at slightly over $40 million in revenue. And, by all benchmarks, you would say he was killing it. And he was doing really, really well. And didn't seem like a logical reason to say, you know what, we're going to scrap everything about the old brand, and then we're going to redesign and come up with a new brand. But Tommy's one of those guys that, first of all, he's not a very complacent owner, which I think is a great trait that most owners should really think about, right? Is complacency is the one things that I think kill the progress of a lot of different companies, because they use that sort of comfort zone as a reason why I'm not going to make any change. And they always say that, a comfort zone is a beautiful place, but nothing ever grows there, right?
Yeah.
So he looked at the brand and he said, you know what, like, this doesn't look like a company that's going to attract A players. This doesn't look like a company that should command high average tickets. This doesn't look like a company that is reflective in, the booking rates that we're trying to achieve. And so we rebranded it, and, his previous brand colors were, black and red. And again, knowing that a woman is the primary demographics, we decided to keep the red because that was very prevalent on his existing truck wraps. But I introduced brown and ivory to soften the brand, to make the brand feel more premium. And so, like, crazy things really did happen afterwards. I mean, he grew from 40 million to, I think, 250 million over the course of the next 4 years. And some of that was through acquisition, but obviously there was a lot of organic growth. through there. But what he really noticed again was, booking rates went so much higher. Recruitment became so much easier. Average tickets increased dramatically. Again, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to have Mrs. Jones believe that there's a reason why she should be paying a premium for your service. And I think that that's, again, a good example, because a lot of companies provide a great service, but if I judge them on what they provide to me as the messaging, I can't get there. Maybe after you finish the job, I believe it. But remember, everything that we're trying to do with a brand is I'm trying to live in someone's mind and I'm trying to control what they think about you, right? So what we did is just marry up with how amazing of a service he actually provided with a brand that matched that expectation. So if I'm Mrs. Jones and I've never used A1 Garage, but I saw the truck, I saw the billboard, I went to their website, I got a val pack in the mail, all these things are communicating a premium-based experience that I would hope. He's certainly not going out to project an image that suggests he's going to be the least expensive garage door repairman in the area. So that's just, one example of someone, at a very high revenue that knew it didn't represent where he had evolved into. And not only that, where he wanted to go, I think is the bigger thing, right? So we see a lot of companies that, listen, they're successful in spite of a really, really weak brand. But I think if you were to dig deeper and look at the metrics and look at the data and what the data actually suggests, that's where you really can make decisions even based on that. So you look at what is your cost per acquisition for a new customer. You look at what your booking rates are, what your closing rates are, what your average tickets are. Those are all data points that suggest or can potentially suggest that you have problems in the perception of what the brand is to the consumer that you're trying to sell to. And, look at it from that perspective. I mean, I think some of the highest multiples that some of our clients have seen on exit were, I'm not going to say it's because of the brand. I mean, obviously the numbers are the numbers, but certainly you have a much healthier appetite from a PE firm looking to acquire you if your branding is done correctly and they know that's something they're not going to have to go in and fix later.
Yeah, but that's an interesting thing that you would not expect to see in a branding book, Dan, which is the fact of the influence of the brand over average sale. And that was just like a light bulb moment for me when I read that. It was like, oh, shit. Yeah, like you're naturally just increasing average dollar per sale by doing that. But more specifically, and we don't have to dive into this, but this was one of the most shocking things I saw on page 67 when it was like percentage of consumers that do not have a company in mind when searching.
That's huge.
And that's like, if you are a big name, and to be clear, I'm the biggest name in my market in foundation repair, right? But the fact is 80% of people don't have a company in mind for appliance repair, 74% for carpet cleaning, decks and patios, 83%, electrical, 90%. And all of these, house cleaning, HVAC, painting, pest control, plumbing, they're all above 83%.
Yeah.
And it's like, it doesn't matter how big you are. They don't know who the hell you are.
Right.
And
because
that was staggering.
Yeah, because most haven't given them a reason to know who they are. Right. So they brand with, the same bullshit type of logos, like the same rooftop clip art logos.
I can't remember what you said in the book. I think it was like, if I have to see another snowflake and fire icon.
It's the same thing. But like, why does it even make sense to have a goat for a garage door company? That probably, if you think about it, makes zero sense. And that's exactly why I wanted to do it, because it's not expected. So like I always say, go take this test if you really want to judge something on your brand. Go on Google, and let's say you're a roofing contractor, type in roofing company logos and click on the image tab in Google and tell me if you see your logo there. And if you see your logo there, then why on earth would Mrs. Jones ever remember having seen your specific logo, right? So what are you doing to actually become sticky and live in someone's mind? But that stat is the whole foundation of why most people are spending way more than they need to. If only like 15% of the people know you exist, that means 85% of the people don't. And now I'm spending all my money to those 85% of the people. Wouldn't it be better if half the people in your community knew? And that's the thing too, when you see guys that is like, oh my God, I've got to expand into other markets because I'm not getting enough leads in my own market. And it's like, dude, why don't you focus on becoming 5 Mile famous? If everyone within 5 miles of your office knew who you were, you wouldn't need to go into other markets.
Yeah.
You know, and it's so ironic sometimes because like, oh, we gotta expand. I'm like, dude, nobody in your own community even knows you exist. Why do you need to expand when you're doing nothing to become visible in your own community? And those are the things too that are hard for a contractor to say they're going to commit to, like going to a home show, like going to the 4th of July parade, like going to the Christmas parade and dressing up the van and pulling it along. Like, dude, I was at a Halloween parade for my daughter. She's in the marching band, right? So she's marching along, and then there's all these other, businesses that pay like $150, right? $150 to have their van wrapped and pulling a trailer 3 miles an hour for like 3 miles long with like 3 deep on both sides of the street with everyone in that community looking at your van. Like you want to tell me where you're going to advertise for that and have people like you're forced to look at that van. It's going 3 miles an hour. Like you can't look away, right? So it's those types of activities that pay the biggest dividends. But guys are like, you know what? I'm just going to spend more on LSA. I'm just going to give the digital marketing company more money, because it's, you got to commit to doing things like that. Like I want to say it's hard. It's not really hard. You just have to commit to it. But those are the things that become visible. Now, like if there was a heating and air company during that parade and I needed a heating and air company, I would probably remember it. If it was branded well, I would remember it.
Yeah.
So Dan, would you recommend like there's a certain size organization that reach out and really go big in branding? Like if a startup's going and they have less than 100,000 in revenue, like how big should they go when it comes to branding?
I mean, the earlier you can do it, the better. Like, so it's always the least amount of money to invest in branding today. It will never be any less expensive than it is today. Obviously within reason and within budget, but we do plenty of startups that, invest in getting the right name. I mean, you guys read the book, so naming is probably the biggest chapter, but that's literally the thing that 90% of every contractor gets wrong, like day one. They name it after themselves or they name it after initials. The two single worst things you could ever do to your business is name it after yourself or name it after initials. And then people can say, well, oh my God, there's plenty of really big companies that use a last name brand. I'm like, yeah, sure there are. But it takes so long for a last name brand to become sticky and memorable and to also be assigned a promise is the other piece of it. I don't know what your last name means. I don't know if you're a piece of shit or not. Like, I don't know, right? Honestly, right? So it's going to take me a long time to think something positive about that last name. But, like think about Jolly Goat. Would you remember his business if it was named after his last name? Like first it would be super hard to spell and know exactly how to spell it, right? But it's much easier for the mind to process Jolly Goat. And let's say this viewer doesn't even know what Jolly Goat looks like. I bet you they have an idea of what it looks like. But with initials, if it was WSJ Contracting, I don't know what that's supposed to look like. I don't know why I would ever remember that. Why would I go to your booth at a home show? What's going to be there that's going to entice me to want to learn more about that? So, definitely naming is something that's so huge. I just wish the day you have a notion that you're going to start a business that you read this book before you file the LLC, because it'll save you like a world of heartache down the road.
Yeah. Well, and actually we have some customers of ours on our software side. Actually, Alex and Josh of Rhino Lift Foundation Repair, North Carolina, that did exactly that. They started with you guys branding their company from the very beginning. And they said it's been just such a game changer for them. And I can't remember, I think it was, boy, that sounds bad for me. I can't remember the name of the company, but no, I do. It's Gottel Heating and Air, I think.
Gettle.
Yeah, thank you. Or is where, you kept that name, but you tied the brand to a story that people could connect to.
Yeah.
Which is, gosh, what is it? It's the child holding the flashlight.
Yeah,
for the dad,
the boy
right?
holding the flashlight, which represents the owner holding the flashlight when he was younger and his dad was an HVAC technician. So yeah, that's another one. I mean, that company grew to 300 or 400 million in revenue and then sold to private equity as well. Huge company. A lot of history and heritage on that particular name because Gettle was actually a brand of air conditioners from the 20s through the 60s, I believe, or 70s. It was actually a manufacturer And then Ken's dad worked for them. And then eventually it branched off to service. And then Ken bought the business later on I think in 2000 or mid 2000s.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, hey, you mentioned in your book a few areas, and by the way, I've seen you're very active on the home service expert group, and you're so willing to give advice, which I know you want to probably pull your hair out sometimes, Dan, when you, but we'll get to that here in a second. But
It's not that I want to pull my hair out. It's just I'm disappointed that whoever was being hired or is being hired for that particular task doesn't know how to do their job. So that is more upsetting to me because I feel like if you're playing with someone's livelihood, and in a lot of respects, you are playing with their livelihoods, to me, there's a minimum set of basic skills that you should know before you start playing with people's livelihoods. So that's more for me that I wish that people who sold truck wraps or was trying to do brand design, that they really understood the craft before they started playing with, the livelihoods of the people who are trusting them. So it's more sad to me. So to me, I feel like your job as a contractor isn't necessarily to know more about that topic than they should. But it's kind of interesting too, because there's a lot more contractors that have read my book, and then they're like giving the book to their designers and like, you need to read this book.
well, that's actually a great kind of segue, because you mentioned in the book of taking and converting the logos and the kind of creative examples to black and white or grayscale. And then, like, I think this is brilliant, but where the hell did you discover that, and why, and why should people do that? Because it's interesting what you can learn from it.
Yeah. So, I mean, you should always be thinking about, when, as a designer, the importance of contrast and legibility. So a lot of designers are sometimes way too dependent on color to try to make things legible, and you forget the fundamentals, and converting something to black and white. So that's an easy thing people can do, is take a photograph of their truck wrap, open it up on their iPhone or their Android, and just edit the photo and convert it to grayscale, convert it to black and white. And you'll be able to tell right away whether or not you have legibility issues, if there's insufficient contrast between the letters and the backgrounds that they're sitting on. So sometimes it's a very simple thing to just even know right away that you have contrast issues, because you're not thinking about how this medium works, right? This is a medium that's meant to be viewed from a distance. So it's very different than looking at something on a screen that's 12 inches in front of you versus looking at something that's parked across the street on my neighbor's driveway. And can I read the brand name? Can I read the URL? Is there enough contrast for me to make all those elements legible? So those are things you often see mistakes with, where they're not really considering contrast. They also tend to do things like not even understanding foreground and background. So if the mind in the brain is being assaulted with everything all at once, then the mind doesn't know which priority to give to the things that's being delivered to it. So, when you look at our work, there's a very strong sense of foreground and background, where the most important elements I want the viewer to process are sitting in the foreground. And of course, the things that are least important, I want them to sit recessed in the background. Again, these are all fundamental things that you would typically learn as a designer or a brand designer. Unfortunately, not a lot of people really have gone through the schooling or the necessary education to really understand some of those things. But I'm happy to give as much feedback to people as I can to try to help them understand some of those issues.
Well, Dan, you talk a lot about like using a masculine figure for your branding as being a big mistake you see a lot of people making. Are there other cardinal sins that you see out there when it comes to branding?
Well, to your point, Terry, like the idea of having a mascot that feels overly aggressive is something that, we never want to see in a mascot. Mrs. Jones is already worried about who's coming to her home. I don't need to add to her anxiety by presenting an image that is maybe alarming to her, or maybe makes her feel a little bit scared about who's showing up to her home. So you always want to kind of diffuse that negative bias that homeowners have against contractors, and try to present an image that makes them feel comfortable with the notion of who may show up to their home. So obviously aggressive mascots are things you want to steer away from. I think also in terms of mascots in general as well, we do an awful lot of mascot branding, but the mascot branding that we do, again, is very rooted in the notion of the desired effect on the consumer psychology. Whereas you look at a lot of other mascots that are developed, and there's a lot of really, really bad mascots that are being developed. And those really kind of work against you in the sense that they can really look unprofessional. So I think you have to be really careful if you decide to go in that endeavor to, hey, I think it would be great to have a mascot. Cool. Like it often is a good idea to have a mascot. However, it's not a good idea to have a mascot that doesn't, look professional, that doesn't, adhere to basic anatomy, that doesn't have the right facial expressions, that doesn't communicate the notion of professionalism. And there's a big difference between professional mascot branding and amateur mascot branding. And unfortunately, most of the stuff that you see today that's being sold online and on Facebook and stuff is really, really amateur. So that really goes against what we're trying to do, because now it looks amateur to the consumer. And now the consumer believes, again, pricing is going to be less. It's going to be not a great experience and things like that. So just be careful if you decide to endeavor in that regard. Like, so the guys that we have on staff, like we have 7 brand designers and we have like another 6 or 7 graphic designers. But the illustrators that we have, I mean, some of these guys come from Disney, and they could look at the facial expression of a mascot. And you might not notice the specifics, but like, even just the size of the eyes and the way the mouth is drawn, like all those things are communicating like very, very distinct subliminal things that you don't think about until you're like, oh my God, now it looks so much more friendly. Now it looks like so much more engaging. And it's those little tweaks that sort of separates, the pros versus the amateurs when it comes to that type of, mascot development.
And you say that, Dan, like in my mind, I'm thinking about everything I've probably done wrong branding my real estate business and like home rental, like everything that you're talking about. Named
so
it for
Terry,
myself.
Listen. So what Dan is telling you is that shirtless firefighter that you wanted to use as your logo for your real estate business is not going to be good. Okay. Especially if he looks angry.
Oh no. It's like I'm just checking the boxes on what not to do.
Yeah.
Like I could be a case study at this point.
Yeah, and the reason being is when Mrs. Jones expects a shirtless firefighter to show up to her door and you show up, she's going to be pissed. Your average ticket's going to go down, buddy.
Yeah, part of it.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean like you can't have a mascot that looks capable, that looks, like they're fit. Just not one that looks like they might beat the shit out of her would be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, and you've got a few examples in there where it's like somebody flying at you with a wrench or holding a big sledgehammer. And it's like, oh, yeah. And it's so wild just how oblivious we can be as contractors at that stage of the design process. It's like, oh, it looks cool, not, hey, does it look cool or attractive to the customer?
Yeah,
right? Not you.
That's the key point, Will, is as you think about this, really keep in mind that the brand is not designed for you personally. It's designed for her. So, we want our clients to love their brands, of course, but I'm not designing it for them specifically. I'm designing it for the people they sell to, and to sort of take themselves out of the equation and say, I know what I like, which is fine, but I'm really more interested in what Mrs. Jones likes. And will this, communicate to her the most important things that I want her to get as a takeaway?
Yeah. Well, and it's weird in my experience, because we consult and talk to a lot of contractors around the country, many of which are starting out. And I mean, Terry, you've spoken to several of them on our show here, and some of them, they're technicians. They started their own business because they didn't want to be an employee anymore. And then what they did is they found the logo as a form of self-expression to them, which is like a cool logo or something that's really rad, but not truly realizing that, like, no, the logo is meant to attract customers, not to show everybody that you're John and you've got a chrome style logo that you can slap on the top of your F650 jacked pickup truck. Sorry, roofers out there, if I pissed you off, all 7 of you that are listening.
No, they see that logo as a representation of themselves, their independence, and they might even tie some of their family heritage and history into it, right? And so it means something to them. It might not mean jack to the person down the street.
Yeah.
And if that's supposed to communicate what they are and what they do, and like you said, be sticky in their mind, they're probably missing the mark.
Yeah.
And Dan, I want to kind of segue into something else here because we talked a lot about the customer benefits of branding. Obviously we've talked about the revenue, average ticket sales, but the internal culture benefits that you're starting to see out of this. I mean, there's another side to the coin. So what are some of the cool things you've seen around the country with some of your clients where it's helping culture, recruiting, retention, all of those things?
Yeah, I think for so many companies, it's this inflection point, right? It's something that really causes the company to pivot. But I think also, obviously, a lot of positive effects on culture, certainly positive effects on recruitment. As a matter of fact, I'm updating the book with the second edition, and I was talking to some of the recruiters that work with a lot of our brands, and I was asking them about the difference between working with a really good brand as they're trying to recruit technicians versus, and it's going to sound painfully obvious, versus, a weak brand and what the difference is in terms of engagement for the people that they're trying to recruit. But that's a huge piece of it. But I think the interesting thing that you find, and whether it's an owner that's been at it for 5 years or 10 years, and then they decide to invest in branding is what it does to their mindset. And I think that's the really interesting thing too, is the psychology and the pivot that they experience. It's like this renewed energy about their own baby, about their own business.
Yeah.
And it sends a strong signal to the employees, right? That we are reinvesting back into this company because I want to create a better future for you. I want to create more opportunity for you. And this is why we're getting a new brand. Because sometimes employees aren't even on board with it. They're like, why are we changing our logo? Like, maybe they love the logo. They don't really understand the thought process behind it.
Yeah, which I read that you suggest don't be sharing it with a bunch of people because they're not qualified.
Well, don't share it during the process because you'll find that a lot of employees are afraid of change and they don't really want to change. And so you sort of get sucked into that mindset, like, hey, maybe I shouldn't be changing, so it becomes something that actually really works against you. But once it's done, and, we've seen some clients have amazing rollouts of the new brand where they literally, have the brand new truck wrap covered in like a sheet or outside the garage, and then they roll up the garage and everyone gets to see the new brand for the first time, and they hand out the new swag and the new hats and the new uniforms for the guys. And they talk about what led them to this point in time. So it's a moment of reflection to acknowledge the hard work of all the employees that allowed you to get to this point in time. And then to talk about why this new brand is so important for the future that we're trying to build together. And so it becomes a really, really great experience and a great opportunity to certainly reflect on where you were and acknowledge their efforts to get you there, but then speak about the future and how, you're counting on them to be part of the future, and what you're building is meant to create a better opportunities for them and their families in the future as well. Yeah. So it's a great thing that we've seen, and we've seen some great examples of guys rolling it out in such a manner that really creates excitement. And then again, too, you're getting the employees proud that they're part of this, proud of these new uniforms that they got and these new truck wraps that they're going to be driving and things like that.
Yeah. Well, and I can't remember, goodness, but it was, I think, a perfect picture. Oh, I do remember. Picture perfect example of this, Dan. And I was so inspired when I heard this. And I do not remember her name, by the way, but Grasshopper Heating and Air was a great case study for this. And I'm sorry.
Amanda Triolo.
Yeah, you and her picked Grasshopper because grasshoppers can never move backwards.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
And that became the theme, like the cultural theme. Like
exactly.
Always move forward. And man, what a case study that was. And I don't know what the light bulb moment was there for you and her on that, to be like, oh, a grasshopper. And but
yeah, it was actually my name that I came up with for her. And we found out all these really cool things about grasshoppers during the process. But what was interesting about that is first of all, her name used to be PMA Comfort. That was the name, or PMA Mechanical. And they did a fair amount of commercial work, very little residential work, probably less than $50,000 a year in residential sales.
Wow.
And they needed to pivot during COVID to do more residential because the commercial was all shut down. And she originally reached out and she said, Dan, I want to rebrand. And I said, great. she said, but I have to keep the name PMA Comfort. And I said, Amanda, I'd love to help you, but I will not take money from you to rebrand PMA Comfort because it will never take you to where you want to go. And I respect if that's your wish and you want to keep it, but I'm not comfortable taking money for something I know won't work. And so she was a little pissed off at me initially. And then she came back to me about a month and a half later. She said, okay, I'm ready. And I said, great. So we came up with Grasshopper, and Grasshopper is one of those great names that is not only great from an external perspective. So as a consumer, I'm excited about the notion that you're going to move my family's, indoor air quality forward, right? You're going to create this awesome experience for me. And then as an employee, I know that we as a company will always be moving forward, and I will be creating opportunities for you as an employee to further your career and to make the experience even better for you. So it's one of those rare examples that the tagline is both external and internal. But Amanda went from about 100,000 in residential sales to, I think this year they did 23 million in revenue, and that's in 4 years.
Wow.
That's nuts growth.
So
that's crazy.
So, just a tremendous success story, but I don't think, in as much as she's an amazing leader, I'm not sure that they get there as PMA Comfort. I just don't see that actually happening. And when you walk into her office, we design all the wall wraps. So you talk about internal culture too, like that's a part of it, is like what the experience looks like when I'm inside the physical location. So we designed all these amazing wall wraps. She's got like the green grass, artificial turf throughout a bunch of the space, and arcade games. And certainly if I'm looking to start my career there as a technician, I know that this is unlike any other HVAC company I've ever walked into, right? So she doesn't have recruitment problems. If anything, she's got too many people that actually want to try to work for them. But, again, it just, that's the power of the brand. Like when it's done correctly, when you have an amazing leader that embraces what the brand really communicates and what the brand stands for. I think that's certainly a great example. Probably one of the fastest growing companies that we've ever branded, I think.
Yeah.
Dan, if you could take like the next little bit and talk to our 10 or 12 subscribers about what you see day to day that just drives you insane when it comes to branding that contractors are doing, what would it be?
Yeah. Hey, tell him we only have 3 listeners. So then that way he can really spill the tea. Like, I just want to hear, like, what fucking drives you crazy, Dan.
I mean, I hate seeing white vans. I mean, we call that white van syndrome. You have, this tremendous billboard that has thousands of impressions on a daily basis that you're not leveraging because you're just using cut vinyl or, not doing a full wrap. So that's certainly one thing that I think, certainly drives me crazy. I wish people would pay more attention to the name and understand how much the name may be really hurting their chances of success. And I know it sounds painful to say, hey, I'm going to rename my contracting business. But I can assure you, we'll rename probably 100 home service companies this year. No one goes through the experience, and on the other side of it, they're pissed off that they changed their names. It's more always like, I wish I had done this sooner. So understand sometimes that your brand name may be something that's really ultimately holding back your chance of success. And again, too, like, just noting that the weaker your brand, the more money you're spending on it. And I would say this too, like I'm gonna give a plug for, we built a special, basically we judge brands on about 10 different criteria. So we thought so many people don't know that their brand has challenges, right? So wouldn't it be cool if we developed like a test that they could self-grade their own brand and run through this? So if you go to sparktest.kickcharge.com, so it's sparktest.kickcharge.com, you could literally grade your own brand. And there's 10 different criteria. It'll explain each criteria along the way and self-assess your own brand. And then it's going to ask you a bunch of questions that maybe you never even thought about when thinking about your own brand. And when you get to the end, it's going to give you a score, and that's going to give you an idea of where you stand with that. Maybe take that test, and you may be a little depressed at the end of it, but at least you'll know a little bit more about where you stand. Certainly the book too. I mean, obviously, I think the book is a good read. I don't know how you felt, Will, after reading it, but I've had people tell me that they felt sick to their stomachs after reading it and they wanted to vomit because they realized they were doing everything wrong for the last 5, 10, 15 years. So I'm not sure that I wanted that to be the desired effect, but I did want people to hopefully take something away from it to figure out a way that they can, maybe, move faster along this journey and get to where they're hoping to go quicker.
No, you imagine that the individual owner out there of home service companies, like thinking about losing their current customers, losing the brand that they've worked over the past however much. I mean, what else they're losing that opportunity cost?
Yeah. And I think, Terry, too, most people grossly overestimate how many people know who they are.
Yep.
There was like, oh, everyone knows me. And I'm like, seriously? With that white van? I doubt many people know who you are. So,
the elementary schools definitely know who you are in that white van.
Yeah. No, I'm gonna go take that test, Dan, and you might get a sad email here in a little bit about how bad I'm doing.
Okay. No, don't worry, Dan. I was not pissed off. I wasn't upset. I saw nothing but opportunity.
Right, and I think that's the ultimate goal, right? I mean, listen, you see guys worried about private equity going into their market, worried about all the consolidation that's transpiring, and I say to those guys, well, what are you doing to become that 5 Mile famous in your own community? Because some of those private equity companies, they're super complacent. They're getting that return on investment that's very consistent, and they don't have the appetite sometimes to want to change anything at all about the brand that they just acquired. And that's fine. Yeah. So I look at that complacency as where it's an opportunity for you, right? Because they're probably not going to do the heavy lifting to get engagement in the community. They're probably not going to be doing a lot to be as visible as they should. And they're content with knowing that if I dump this amount of money onto LSA every month, I can expect to get this much revenue from it, and that's fine. But you have to really even start thinking about what is the messaging that you can deliver that is different. And how do you even talk about why that they should be wanting to do business with a local family-owned and operated business, right? So you got these corporate-owned entities now in the community. But do the people know that there's a difference? Do the people know why they should hire you as opposed to these big corporate entities? And do they know you exist, right? Because you can argue all day long that they're going to outgun you on LSA and they're going to be at the top of every single search query because they're going to spend the shit out of it, right? So what do we do to combat that? What are we doing to make sure that we're as well known as they are with half the budget that they have or a fraction of the budget that they have? How do we leverage every single opportunity and every single impression that's being made, whether it's the truck, whether it's the sight sign, whether it's the uniform the guys are wearing? All those things are the things that I would say invest in those things as much as you reasonably can to try to, combat what's happening in your own community from a competitive landscape.
Well, and that's what I don't think we mentioned this before, but we should have is for the small guy, it is a magic bullet that, in why I found opportunity is I am the big guy in my market. And then I saw like, oh crap, I need to work on this. Otherwise somebody's going to eat my lunch. A little guy's going to eat my lunch because big companies are complacent. They're afraid of change. And then the small guys, they think, well, they're the big guys. They've been around for forever, and it's just amazing how that works. But yeah. So Dan, listen, we ask all of our guests this at the end of our episodes, and many of our 3 or 4 listeners know that I'm the patron saint of screwing things up. And if you're going to screw it up, at least screw it up so bad you can brag about it, right, Terry? So
always.
Dan, what's a screw up you had in your career that maybe you could at least brag about it and help somebody out there in the world?
So I'm going to answer this with a little bit of a personal story. So I have someone here that I had promoted to be head of operations, and that was in 2020, I think. And I basically said, hey, I wanted to run things. I wanted to basically manage all day to day. I don't want to be involved in it. And yet I was involved in it when I shouldn't have been involved in it. And then February of 2021, I found out that my heart was really jacked up. And I needed to have double bypass surgery. I got very fortunate that it was discovered, that I found a second doctor that basically saved my life. And he perform the surgery. And while I was out recovering from that surgery, and it's a bitch of a surgery if you haven't gone through it. I don't recommend it if you can avoid it.
Yeah, 1-star review on Yelp for that.
But it was super cool, the not dying part. But what I also learned through that experience is here I am, I'm laid up, and now I actually can't run anything, and I can't be involved in day to day, and I can't really do much of anything. And I basically came to find out that this place runs amazing with the leadership I had put in place, but I had not given the opportunity to perform as leaders. And so that experience really taught me to trust in the leadership that I had hired and to let them make decisions and to let them handle things. And since then, so this February would be 4 years. I mean, I think the business has almost tripled since then. And I think a lot of it is due to me staying focused on what I'm good at, which is branding, and what I'm not so good about, which is operations. And so I would say trust your people and give them the opportunity to make decisions. And you may find that they are really good at their jobs. And I'm so glad I went through that experience because I am no longer involved in so much of the day to day, and I just let them make decisions. And I'm more visionary at this point, which I really like being. And I'll have ideas about, hey, maybe we should try doing this. And then they just execute it. And I don't need to know how they executed it. I don't need to know much of the details about what they're going to do to execute it. So just trust the people that you put in place and give them the opportunity to really grow as a leader. And they may surprise you in terms of how well that they can perform if they're given the opportunity. So if I don't go through that experience, I don't know that I arrive where I'm at right now because I wasn't capable of letting go from a lot of the stuff that I really should have been letting go of.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. And Dan, I am glad that you are doing better after that surgery. And Terry, let's just make a point to not have to go through that surgery if we don't have to, buddy.
I completely trust you to run this shit without me, buddy.
Yeah, that's right. I'll run this ship into the ground. You know how I run. I'm the worst, and I'm the same Dan in my business. We've got a team in place, and thank God, because otherwise, man, I would make that place it'd be on fire. They say Will's walking around with matches when I show up. So, but hey, Dan, I appreciate you. Obviously the book Branded Not Blanded. You got a new edition coming out. Also, I did buy building a big small business brand.
Yeah.
I know it's a little older, but still found value in it.
Yeah.
When's the new version come out? And I got them off Amazon, but do you have another location you prefer people get it?
Amazon's fine. You could get it at KickCharge.com as well. The second edition that I'm working on right now, I'm hoping to release at the end of the first quarter. And basically what I did is, you may say, well, why did you need a second edition? And what I wanted to focus more as far as adding new content that was data driven. So I wanted to have more examples of results, more examples specifically related to brand and the effect of digital marketing and cost per acquisition, things like that. So there's a lot of data that I've been able to procure over the last 2 years, working with some other digital marketing companies and comparing results of better branded websites versus websites that maybe didn't have a good brand. And I think that information is really, really important to add. So I was like, you know what? I don't want to wait another 10 years to write another book, which is the last time I wrote that blue book in your hand was 10 years ago. So I was like, let me just update this and just add a bunch more content that speaks to that specifically. So I'm excited to add that content in there. I think it'll make a big difference in there. But so.
Well, I'm excited. And of course, anybody out there listening, Dan, you're obviously massively involved on social, very active, answering questions specific to the Home Service Experts group on Facebook that I've seen, but also other outlets. So I just appreciate you being on. I know what you do makes a difference and love it. And otherwise, Terry, now look at you. You leveled up today, buddy. You know a little bit about marketing and branding.
And how bad I'm doing.
Yeah. But it's all you guys out there. Dan, thank you so much for coming on. Terry, appreciate you, buddy. And we will see you next week on another episode of Beers with Contractors. You guys have a good one.
See ya.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Beers with Contractors. We hope you enjoyed our chat as much as we did. Before we say our final goodbyes, a friendly reminder. Beers with Contractors encourages responsible drinking. If you choose to enjoy a beverage during our time together, please do so in moderation and only if you're of legal drinking age in your country or state. Furthermore, the advice and insights shared in this podcast are for informational purposes only. Always consult with professionals and experts in your field, and be sure to follow local laws and regulations regarding licensing and permits. We're here to help, entertain, and inspire, but your safety and compliance are important. So, as you head out into the world of construction and contracting, remember to build responsibly and make decisions that stand the test of time. Thanks for joining us today. We'll catch you on the next episode of Beers with Contractors. Until then, cheers to your success.